Honorable M.A. Sumandiran, you have 11 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Presiding Member. I'm glad to speak just after the Acting Minister of Finance, who recognized some good that may have come about as a result of the economic crisis. He did say it's not a good thing to have the economic crisis, but there are some lessons that we are learning from that as well. I agree with him, but before I get on to the anti-corruption bill, I want to just deal with the Civil Procedure Code amendment. Honorable Minister of Justice, it's a good amendment, particularly running down cases, motor accident cases, and so on. This will be of immense use. So I congratulate the Minister for this amendment. And the new bill on assistance to and protection of victims of crime and witnesses. This has a history. And I'm glad that this is also now being brought in some new features, particularly video evidence is being enabled. President Mahinda Rajapaksa is here. When he was president and he appointed the Commission of Inquiry under Justice Udalagama, there was a video evidence that started to be recorded from Dr. Manoharan, whose son was one of the 5 young persons who were killed by security forces in Trincomalee. And halfway through his evidence, that was stopped and it was not permitted. From that time onwards, this to enable video evidence through law was mooted, but it wasn't possible under that regime, and it was only in 2015 when there was a change in government that for the first time Witness Victim Protection Act was enacted, but that too had serious shortcomings, and I'm glad that some of those are being rectified here. The point that I want to make here is that accountability is an important issue. பொறுப்பு கூறல் மிக முக்கியமான ஒரு விடயம். அது நிதி விடயங்களிலே மட்டுமல்ல, மற்ற பல விடயங்களிலே பொறுப்பு கூறல் முக்கியமானதாக இருக்கிறது. இப்பொழுது நடந்து கொண்டிருக்கிற ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் மனித உரிமை பேரவை கூட்டத்தொடரிலே மனித உரிமைகளுக்கான உயர்ஸ்தானிகளுடைய அறிக்கையிலே இது தெளிவாக சொல்லப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. இலங்கை பொறுப்பு கூறல் சம்பந்தமான விடயத்திலே அசமந்த போக்காக இருக்கிறது என்பது சுட்டிக்காட்டப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has very specifically mentioned that Sri Lanka hasn't taken enough measures with regard to accountability. When there is no accountability, it is impunity that reigns. Now that brings me to the main bill that is before us for debate today, the anti-corruption bill. What I am reminded of is what Judge Veeramantri wrote in his book called The Law in Crisis. In the preface to that book, he said, Sri Lanka is embarrassed by the richness of the sources of law and not the lack of them. We are embarrassed by the richness of the laws that we have, not the lack of laws. But implementation of the laws is what has been the problem and continues to be a problem. And I say continues to be a problem because it's an irony. It's an irony that it is this government that is bringing these laws now. By pressure from IMF, from various other international actors, you are enacting laws. I'm wondering whether this is just waste of paper when the country is going through economic crisis, because only when it is implemented we can see the efficacy, the benefit of this. Just to satisfy the IMF or other international bodies, passing laws is not going to combat corruption in this country. No, it's a shame. It's a shame when the IMF came in, they identified as one of the challenges corruption susceptibilities. Corruption susceptibilities. And then, now they have instituted governance diagnostics. Now these are heavy indictments on the governance structures of this country. There is no politician, no person who has held office, political office, who has been convicted and sentenced in this country for corruption. In a country where the International Monetary Fund says one of the greatest challenges is corruption susceptibilities, we don't have ever. I mean, we have had persons who have contested elections for treating and so on being unseated. But those who have held cabinet portfolio, those who have held political office, no one to date has been convicted of corruption. That's the test of the pudding is in the eating. Not to look at it and, say, oh, how nice it looks, the aroma is lovely. That's what we are doing today. Right? The test is in the eating. Only when it is implemented will we know whether we have done the right thing or not. So far we haven't. And I said it's an irony that it is this government that is bringing these laws, because I mean, only a year ago, the constant chorus that we heard in this country is Kaputu Kaka. Kaputu Kaka. Why Kaputu Kaka? The big crow that steals. The big crow that steals. This government is still controlled by that Kaputu Kaka. It is the same people who sit in the government ranks. No change. So isn't it funny that you are now bringing all these laws, right? And the persons who were identified as the ones who collapsed the economy of this country, ones who stole from this country, are still in charge. In fact, news is that as soon as the president returns, persons who are kept away from cabinet are going to get cabinet portfolio. Why were they kept away? Because it's well known. There are no secrets in this country. People know who takes 10%, who takes 15%, who takes 100%. People know. That is why a year ago there was this revolution in this country. But you only managed to chase away the president. Others were just, put away for a while. They are still in this house. They are still seated in the front rows. They are not in the cabinet for a little while, but they are creeping in one by one. They come back. And so, without that fundamental change, without that change happening, where the control is still in the hands of the wrongdoers, and you are the wrongdoers, all of you ministers were there in that government. Merely because you made some cosmetic changes doesn't mean that you have changed. You are only bringing these laws now to say, okay, we have brought the laws, we have changed it. After this, there won't be corruption in this country.
We have 2 more minutes.
There won't be bribery in this country. No, that is far-fetched. So, while appreciating that this law must come in, this was prepared mostly during the last parliament. Still, there are lots of shortcomings, and for lack of time, I won't go into many of these details. But you have mentioned members of parliament, and you should in section 93. But why don't you include members of provincial council and members of local authorities, particularly chairman of local authorities? There are serious allegations everywhere of bribery. And with regard to the issue that Honorable Professor GLP is raised, I would say, as was in the original Bribery Act.
Yes, Honorable Kiriella. Okay, Honorable Kiriella is giving you a few more minutes.
Thank you. As was in the original Bribery Act, I'm not referring to the act that was passed in 94, one that was prior to that. I think it said the person who makes a false complaint will be punished with a term that the one against whom, when he made the complaint, if he had been found guilty, was liable to be punished. The same punishment. So I think what Honorable Professor Pires was raising was that the punishment for the offence is 7 years, but if the person who made the complaint is unable to substantiate it in some way, he goes in for 10 years. It's higher than the punishment for bribery itself. I think it will be just if you make it the same. I also agree that the span of what is bribery and corruption must be expanded, and the law that was passed in 1975, the Asset and Liabilities Declaration, was useless in a sense. I remember in 2010 when I was appointed to this House, since there was a delay in certain areas, election had to be, polling had to be reheld, the National List members were appointed just a day or two before the Parliament sitting started. And I read the law and I hurriedly made an asset declaration because the law said you can't sit or vote in Parliament. So I was very concerned, immediately did it. But when I came to Parliament after a few months, I realized out of the 225 in that Parliament, only 17 had actually made the declaration. Only 17 had actually made the declaration. It was a useless piece of paper. But then there was public consciousness, and I think everybody makes a declaration now. But it's not available to the public because even the person who pays that 750 rupees and gets it, it's an offense to publicize it. So it is because of that, some of us, on our own, voluntarily, publicized our own asset declaration some years ago. 5 of us did it, and then few others joined, and now it's all available on the web. So it's a welcome move to make it public, because that is the whole purpose of an asset declaration, that people must know. One matter that while the Acting Minister of Finance is here, SOE reforms are important, and it's going to happen. Honourable Minister of Justice, in responding to Professor Pires, mentioned 2 cases that I appeared in, the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation privatization and the LMSL matter, which he, as the chair of COPE then, brought out to the public.
You have 2 more minutes, Honourable Member. You have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And I was privileged to appear as counsel for Honourable Vasudeva Nanayakara in both matters. And in both matters, the Supreme Court reversed that privatization. Now, the current president was the Prime Minister at that time when all of that happened. Recently, at a forum, I raised this issue about the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation privatization. Because one of the institutions that have been identified is Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation. The last time you did that, it was sold for 6 billion. When its basic asset value itself was 155 billion. 6 billion, basic asset value itself was 155 billion. Not to mention the goodwill, the monopoly that it had, the actuarial value, etc. Now, when I raised that issue, the Minister of Finance said, no, there was no fraud in it, it was only a question of valuation. I mean, do you say, when the difference is 6 billion and 155 billion, it was only a problem of valuation? Obviously, there was fraud in it. So, I am raising this matter because in the economic reform agenda, you have to deal with, you have to do SOE reforms. But how do you ensure that there is no corruption in it? You might say, well, this law will take care of it. No, it won't. In one of those matters, the then Secretary to the Treasury was found guilty by the Supreme Court. He was fined 500,000 rupees. He was told that he shouldn't hold public office hereafter. He gave an affidavit to court. But then what happened? As soon as that judge who gave the order retired, the Supreme Court sat, the full court sat. 10 judges sat. Only one judge, no, 10 judges sat. Subsequently, it was a 3-judge bench that gave the order, but 10 judges sat originally. Only one judge dissented. All the others allowed the withdrawal of that affidavit, and that person became the Secretary to the Treasury all over again, also under President Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is here.
Honorable member, please wind up.
I'm flagging this, thank you, I'm concluding. I'm flagging these matters to say, you can have a perfect law on paper, but how do you ensure that it is implemented? So far in this country, we have not seen it implemented. And that is the concern I have about delayed prosecution arrangement, the DPA arrangement that you have brought in here. That is a concern I have about withdrawal of indictments, because we saw as soon as the government changed in 2020, indictments have all been withdrawn that the Bribery Commission had instituted. So that's the political culture of this country, and until that changes, this will be dead letter law. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable S.M.